Hi, it's Monday, and most of you are hopefully asleep by now, but I am not. So I had 5 million things to do today. But I'm still reading, and it's Monday, and I'm going to get it done. So here is chapter 16. Hey, I hope you all had a great break. It was a long first day back for me, very long, but I had a very restful break. Got to see my family, got to see some friends, got to have some fun, got to read some books for myself. That was lovely, and got to, mostly relax and then get a few productive things done. So hopefully you had a similar lovely break, whatever you were doing. So chapter 16, in which things get very dark for a while. Oh, so I always forget to do your recap. So last time we let's see, we had the Quazzle, and it tried to take the key that Daystar found from them because it thought it was his key, but Daystar didn't give it to him, and the dragon tried to eat him, and he ran away. Or it. We don't know if the Quazzle is he or she. So, chapter 16, in which things get very dark for a while. We started walking again. I don't know how far we went or how long it took us. The tunnel forked and we turned right. Then it forked again. Forked is when it splits. And we went left. We walked through a large cave with walls like black mirrors and a damp one that dripped water onto our heads, and an unpleasant slimy one with gray moss on the walls. I was very glad that Telemaine had told us which way to go. We would have gotten lost very quickly without his directions. A few times I thought I heard squishing noises behind us, but I wasn't sure enough to say anything. I was a lot more worried about remembering all the things Telemaine had told us than I was about the Quazzle. Just when I was beginning to think we had taken a wrong turn somewhere, we came to another cavern. This one was long and narrow, full of orange light, and very hot. The tunnel came out halfway up one wall, about 100 feet above the floor of the cave. A narrow path ran along one wall from where we stood to a dark opening on the opposite side of the cave. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Shiera asked, eyeing the path dubiously, which is like, I'm not getting on that thing. I don't like the look of that. Okay. "I am now," I said. "This is the last cave Telemaine mentioned. Once we're on the other side, it shouldn't take us long to get to the castle." "We have to get to the other side first," Shiera pointed out. "That doesn't look very safe." "The caves of chance aren't supposed to be safe," I said. "I'm surprised we haven't run into something a lot more dangerous than the Quazzle." "I suppose—" "Night Witch!" Shiera shouted, a minute too late. The kitten was already halfway across the narrow path. Shiera sighed. "Well, now we have to go across." Shiera insisted on going first, because Night Witch was her cat. I didn't argue much. I was next, and the dragon came last. I had to hug the wall to keep from losing my balance and falling, which was hard to do with the key in one hand, Morwen's bundle in the other, and the sword under one arm. The dragon didn't have nearly as much difficulty as I did, even though it was a little too large for the ledge. It just dug its claws into the rock and kept on coming. I bet it's like when y'all are climbing the rock wall and going around the sides, kind of like that. Only without those, lovely handholds and things. Okay, when we finally made it to the other side, Shiera and I were covered with black rock dust. We took turns brushing each other off, while Night Witch sat far enough back to avoid getting any of it on her, and the dragon looked superior. Evidently, rock dust doesn't cling to dragon scales, which was very nice for the dragon, but didn't do much to improve Shiera's temper. "How much further is it?" Shiera asked as we started off. "I don't know," I said, "but it shouldn't take much longer." "I hope not," said the dragon. "I don't like this tunnel." "Why not?" Shiera asked. "It isn't finished." Oh my gosh, I totally forgot to do the dragon's voice. So sorry. Rewind. "I hope not," said the dragon. "I don't like this tunnel." "Why not?" Shiera asked. "It isn't finished," the dragon said. I looked around. The tunnel was a lot rougher than the others we'd come through, and there were rocks sticking out at odd angles from the walls and the roof and even the floor. Every now and then it narrowed into a crooked little passage. If the dragon had been much bigger, it wouldn't have been able to fit through sometimes. We still saw side passages once in a while, but they seemed smaller and farther apart than they had in the first part of the tunnel. "It does look sort of incomplete," I said. "I think somebody—" "Daystar, look out!" Shiera yelled. A large rock fell out of the ceiling, just missing my head. Along with the rock came a shower of pebbles that didn't miss. Oh, it hit his head. "Get back," I shouted. I dropped Morwen's bundle and shoved Shiera. Run! Shiera stumbled backward. Nightwish yowled and made a tremendous leap right onto the dragon's nose. The dragon jerked in surprise, and Nightwish made another jump and vanished into the darkness behind it. I heard more rumblings, and I shoved Shiera again, just as the roof came down on top of us. That was very scary. When I woke up, it was very dark, and I was lying face down on the tunnel floor. Somehow I'd managed to keep hold of the sword and the key. I could feel them, one halfway under me and the other digging into my left palm. I ached all over. I tried to move, but my legs were pinned under something heavy, and I couldn't drag them free. I pushed myself up a little and stared into the darkness. Shiera? Nightwitch? Dragon? No one answered. They couldn't all have gotten caught in the cave-in. I'd been the closest to the falling rocks, and only my legs were pinned. I started wishing I had the lamp, and then I remembered that the key glowed when I touched the sword of the Sleeping King. I pushed up farther and felt under me for the hilt, and something very moist and heavy hit me in the middle of my back. I slammed back into the floor and almost lost consciousness again. The thing on my back bubbled. "The key! Let go! Drop it! Give it to me!" Instinctively, I shoved my right hand further under my chest, groping for the sword. My fingers touched the hilt, and the key started to glow. It wasn't quite as good as the lamp, but I could see. I heard a muffled shriek, and the weight left my back suddenly. An instant later, I saw the Quazzle bending over my hand, and I tightened my grip on the key. The Quazzle bounced angrily. "You're still alive! I don't want you alive! I want the key! That's why I fixed the rocks!" I shook my head to clear it. "You made the tunnel cave in? Just to get a key?" "Of course," the Quazzle spluttered. "I'm supposed to take care of it. I'll get it, too. All I need is more rocks." The Quazzle wobbled backward, toward the caved-in part of the tunnel. I rolled onto one elbow and looked back over my shoulder, trying to see what I was doing. A medium-sized rock came crashing down beside me. The Quazzle made an angry whistling noise. "Hold still." "So you can drop rocks on me?" I wouldn't do that. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a long pile of something that seemed to end in a tangle of red hair. Shiera hadn't been buried under the rocks, then. Unfortunately, she didn't look like she would be able to help me with the Quazzle anytime soon, and I still didn't know where Nightwitch or the dragon was. I twisted sideways, moving off the sword as much as I could with my legs pinned, and started working the sword of the Sleeping King out of its sheath. It's not easy to draw a sword when you're lying on top of it, but I thought I might need it if the Quazzle came any closer. There was a sizzling noise from somewhere behind me, and a dozen or so rocks of assorted sizes came rolling down on top of me. Some of them hit places that had already been battered by the cave-in, and I yelled. The Quazzle bubbled happily, and a few more rocks went by on one side. I shoved myself up on my hands as far as I could, and yanked the sword the rest of the way out of the sheath and out from under me at the same time. I twisted around just as two more large rocks came rolling down. Awkwardly, I swung at the rocks with the flat of the sword, trying to deflect them a little. There was a bright flash as the sword hit them, and the rocks went flying toward the far wall of the tunnel. I heard a low humming sound that suddenly changed into a rumble, and the light in the cave went out. For some reason, I thought of the clearing where I'd said the spell at the sword of the Sleeping King, when everything had gone dark, and the voice had called me the bearer of the sword. This time, I didn't hear any voice, but the rumbling got louder and louder, and suddenly I realized that my legs were free. I curled them up under me, so I wouldn't be trapped again if the Quazzle started another cave-in or something. The rumbling began to die down, and I heard faint shouts mixed in with it, and the bubbling noise that the Quazzle made, and someone groaning. Then the rumbling stopped, and I could see again. Carefully, this sword does weird things. Carefully, because my legs felt kind of rubbery, I stood up and looked around. I could still hear the shouting. It sounded faint and far away, and after a moment it faded completely. Shiera was the person who had groaned. As I looked at her, she moved a little, and suddenly I felt a lot better about things generally. Then I heard squishing noises from in back of me, and I whirled. Behind me, the tunnel was completely blocked by a sloping pile of rocks and dirt. At the base of the pile, where I had been trapped, was an empty space that looked as if something had sliced cleanly through the rocks and lifted them out of the way. Midway up the slope was the Quazzle. It was wobbling hastily toward the tunnel floor. I pointed the sword of the Sleeping King at it, and it stopped abruptly. "Just a minute, you," I said. "You have some questions to answer." I didn't know, said the Quazzle. I still don't. Keep the key. Nice to meet you. Goodbye. Oh, no, you don't. I stepped in front of it so that if it wobbled forward any more, it would get stuck on my sword. I'm going, said the Quazzle. It seemed to be stammering a lot more than it had before. I found myself hoping it was even more nervous than it looked. You aren't going anywhere until you explain why you want this key so badly, I said. And maybe not then. I don't think I ought to leave something as sneaky and treacherous as you running around loose. I tried to sound intimidating, even though I had no idea what I was going to do with the Quazzle. I didn't think I could just kill it. And I certainly didn't want to bring it along with me, but I wasn't about to tell the Quazzle any of that. After what it had tried to do, I thought it deserved to worry a little. Daystar? Shiera's voice distracted me from the Quazzle, which was bubbling and popping worriedly to itself. Daystar, what happened? The Quazzle made the tunnel cave in, I said. It was trying to kill me so it could get the key. Are you all right? Of course I'm... Ow! Said Shiera. I looked quickly around and saw her sitting up very carefully. She looked a little pale. I think I broke my arm, she said. Can I do anything to help? I asked. You can keep that stupid Quazzle away from me, Shiera said. I'll be fine as long as I don't move much. I didn't believe her, but I couldn't have done much to help her anyway. I don't know anything about setting broken arms, except that you can make things a lot worse if you don't know what you're doing. And if Shiera wanted me to keep watching the Quazzle instead of trying to help her, she would probably get mad if I didn't. I doubted that would be good for her arm either. Besides, I didn't want the Quazzle to get away and try dropping the roof on us again. Where's Night Witch? Shiera asked after a while. And the dragon. I don't know, I told her. I haven't seen them since the tunnel fell in. You miserable little blob! I looked around in surprise and was very relieved to see Shiera glaring at the Quazzle and not at me. If anything's happened to Night Witch because of your stupid cave-in, I'll melt you into a puddle, she went on. You'd better not try, the Quazzle said, starting to bounce. The wizard will get you if you do. What wizard? I said. Wizards again. It's always wizards. The Quazzle bubbled unhappily. I can't tell you. Oh no, Shiera said. She stood up slowly and came over beside me, holding her right arm carefully in her left one. I guess I'd better just melt you then and save some time. No, said the Quazzle. Little ripples ran over it and it seemed to shrink. Then you'd better tell us what wizard you're talking about, I said. The one who gave me the key, the Quazzle said unwillingly. He told me to take care of it until he came back for it. How long ago was that? I asked, ignoring Shiera, who was rubbing her bruises and muttering to herself. A long time, the Quazzle said. He never came back, so it's still my responsibility. Not if I melt you, it isn't, Shiera said, and the Quazzle subsided very suddenly. What is it a key to? I said, and why did the wizard leave it here? Don't know, the Quazzle said sullenly. That's like pouting. He said people would come look for it and try to take it. That's why he wanted me to look after it. You aren't supposed to take it. No one's supposed to take it but the wizard. What did this wizard look like? I asked, although I had an unpleasant feeling that I knew already. The Quazzle's description sounded a little like Antorel, but he was definitely older and he'd been wearing blue and gray robes instead of blue and brown. I was extremely relieved. Shiera didn't recognize the description either, but she wasn't as relieved as I was. How do we know this stupid thing isn't lying? She said. I think we should... What's that? I could hear something far down the tunnel, but it echoed too much for me to be able to tell what it was. It seemed to be getting louder. I could hear... Oh, sorry, that's the same paragraph. I think something's coming, I said to Shiera. Then, you stay where you are, to the Quazzle, who had been trying to wobble a little closer to the bottom of the rock pile. The Quazzle froze again, and Shiera gave me a disgusted look. I know something's coming, but what is it? I didn't answer. The noise came closer, and I saw a flickering light partway down the tunnel. I shifted position so I could watch the Quazzle and still see some of the rest of the tunnel. The light got brighter, and a moment later, a bunch of people came through one of the side passages. They were all short and sort of squashed looking, and bigger than the elves we'd met, but considerably shorter than a normal person. Most of them were carrying picks or shovels or long pointed iron poles, and a couple of them had torches. They seemed to be following something, but they were too far away and the light was too bad for me to be sure. "Dwarves!" I said. They must have heard the echo, because two of them looked up and saw us. One of them shouted something, but I couldn't make out the words. "Terrific," Shiera muttered as they started in our direction. "What'd you have to do that for?" "They'd have seen us anyway," I said. "I mean, we'd be sort of difficult to miss with the key lighting up the tunnel like this, and maybe they'll help us. Dwarves do sometimes. Mother had me study a whole lot of examples 2 years ago after the prince came through looking for the glass coffin." That would be Snow White's prince. "I thought princes looked for glass shoes, not coffins," Shiera said. She squinted into the dark part of the tunnel between us and the dwarves. "They're coming this way. What's that in front of them?" I didn't have to answer, because a second later, Night Witch came bounding out of the darkness with her tail held very high. She looked extremely proud of herself. She went straight to Shiera and started rubbing against her legs and purring. "I'm glad to see you too," Shiera said. She started to bend over and winced. "Sorry, kitten, you'll have to wait to get petted until somebody does something about this stupid arm." Night Witch stopped rubbing and looked up. "Well?" "Well, I said I was sorry," Shiera said. "I didn't ask to break it." The dwarves had reached the edge of the key's glow, and the whole tunnel was lit up by their torches. It made things a lot more cheerful, as well as letting me get a good look at the dwarves. There were 7 of them, 5 males and 2 females, all carrying shovels and picks. I could see the dragon in the back of the dwarves, looking almost as smug as Night Witch had. "Look," it said, when it got close enough to talk without shouting. "I found a whole lot of dwarves." "I see that," I said. I bowed to the dwarves as well as I could while trying to watch the Quazzle at the same time. "My name is Daystar, and that's Shiera, and we're very pleased to meet you." "They're going to dig through the part of the tunnel that came down," the dragon said. "Hold on just a minute," one of the dwarves said. "I didn't say I'd help it, not exactly. I said I'd look at this cave-in of yours." "Me too," said another. "Proper mess it looks." "Not natural," said a female dwarf. She looked at Shiera and me suspiciously. "How do you know?" Shiera said belligerently. "We made this tunnel," still another dwarf said, "and dwarf-made tunnels don't just fall in." "Not ever," said the first one. "Of course not," I said. "The Quazzle made the tunnel cave in. It was trying to stop us from getting out of the Caves of Chance." "The Quazzle?" the dragon said, looking interested. "That dessert thing is back again?" "You can't eat it until we find out if it knows anything else," I said. "Besides, you had plenty of lunch." The dragon sighed. "I suppose so. All right, I'll wait." I looked at the dwarves. "We'd be very much obliged to you if you would help us get through this, or show us a way around, or something," I said. "Now why would we want to do that?" one of them said. "I don't see any reason," said another. "Lot of work for nothing," added a third. "And I don't like dragons," said a voice from the middle of the group. The dragon glared, but it couldn't pick out the dwarf who'd spoken. "Could you at least set Shiera's arm?" I asked. One of the female dwarves started to reply, but she was cut off by a yell from Shiera. "Daystar, behind you!" I raised the sword and spun around just as the Quazzle bunched itself together and jumped at me. It came flying through the air, and I ducked. Something dark and purple shot out of it towards me, and I slashed at it with my sword. I got most of the purple stuff, and part of the Quazzle as well. I heard it shriek, and then it landed and launched itself again, straight for the wall of the tunnel. "I'll kill all of you," it whistled angrily. "Key stealers! Cannibals! I'll kill you dead!" I lunged for it, but it was too late. The Quazzle hit the wall of the tunnel, and instead of bouncing, it vanished into the rock, like water being absorbed by a sponge, only faster. An instant later, a shower of rocks fell out of the roof of the tunnel, and I heard the walls creaking ominously. "Run!" I yelled. I started to follow my own advice, but I saw a large rock shifting in the wall of the tunnel just above Shiera's head. I shouted again and swung the sword at it, hoping it would be deflected like the other rocks the Quazzle had tried to drop on me. The flat of the sword hit the rock, and everything seemed to slow down suddenly. There was a lot of creaking, and the top of the tunnel started to sag, as if it were trying to fall in again, but couldn't quite manage it. The sword got very heavy, and then there was an angry-sounding rumble, and the whole tunnel shook. The rock that had been heading for Shiera went bouncing off the opposite wall of the tunnel, and all of the creaking and rumbling stopped very abruptly. I didn't move for several seconds at least. I didn't think the quasil would give up this easily. Then I saw a thin trickle of dark purple stuff dripping down the wall of the tunnel where the quasil had disappeared. I watched it for a minute or two, and decided that we probably didn't have to worry about the quasil anymore. I looked at Shiera. "Are you all right?" "That's a stupid question," Shiera said. "My arm is broken." "I mean, you didn't get any more hurt than you were already, did you?" "No," she said. She looked at me. "Thanks." I was so surprised that I couldn't think of anything to say for at least a minute. You're welcome," I said finally. I realized suddenly that my sword still had some wet purple stuff on it from hitting the quasil, and I started digging in my pocket for my handkerchief so I could wipe off the sword. I couldn't find it. I sighed. It had probably fallen out of my pocket somewhere on the trip through the caves. I didn't really mind losing it, except that now I didn't have anything to get the purple goo off my sword with. I turned to the dwarves. "Excuse me, but do any of you—" I stopped. The dwarfs were standing in a tight group, and all 7 of them were staring at the sword. "Now, why didn't you think to mention you had that?" one of them said. And that is the end of chapter 16. Next week, we will have chapter 17, in which they get out of the caves and into even more trouble. Oh, Lord. So, some very exciting stuff coming up in the end of the book. And I'm very, very excited to read it with you. So until next week, have a really, really good week. And if you're on spring break this week, enjoy yourself and think of all us working schmucks who are, not on break. So anyway, I'll see you next week and have a good one. Good night, everybody.